The bright, hopeful atmosphere of an elementary school in Inver Grove Heights radiated with the energy of a new academic year. Sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating the faces of eager students as they hurried to their classrooms, their laughter echoing down the freshly polished halls. Teachers greeted children at their doors, offering warm smiles and encouragement, while parents lingered in the entryway, proud and a little wistful as they watched their kids embark on another year of learning and growth. Yet, this cheerful scene stood in stark contrast to the weighty questions looming over Minnesota's political future. In the midst of youthful optimism, the adults in the room, educators, administrators, and visiting officials, carried the burden of decisions that would shape not just the school, but the entire state. On September 10, 2025, Governor Tim Walz arrived to mark the start of the school year. He moved from classroom to classroom, engaging with students, listening to their stories, and sharing in their excitement. His presence was more than ceremonial. It was a celebration of Minnesota's youngest generation and a reminder of the promise they held for the future. But beneath the surface of this festive occasion, a larger question lingered in the air, one that followed Governor Walz from classroom to classroom. Would he seek a third term as Minnesota's governor, or would this visit mark the beginning of a farewell tour? As the visit drew to a close, the focus shifted. Reporters who had watched the governor interact with students now pressed him for answers about his political future. The questions came quickly, their tone urgent. Would he run again? What would his decision mean for the state? Walz, drawing on his experience as a former teacher, spoke passionately about the importance of investing in public education. He emphasized the need for strong schools and dedicated teachers, reminding everyone that the future of Minnesota depended on the opportunities provided to its children. But even as he spoke, it was clear that the real focus was on his next move, his words carefully measured, his answers leaving room for speculation. Every handshake with a student, every photo with a teacher, seemed to carry an extra weight. The unspoken question, "Will you run again?" hovered in the background, shaping every interaction and every smile for the camera. The setting itself, a school dedicated to nurturing the next generation, made the political questions feel even more urgent. Here in these halls, the future was not an abstract idea, but a living, breathing reality, embodied by the children who would one day inherit the consequences of today's decisions. Governor Walz found himself balancing two roles: the leader responsible for guiding Minnesota forward and a political figure under constant scrutiny. Every step he took was watched, every word analyzed as he navigated the delicate intersection of public service and personal ambition. In the end, the stakes were unmistakable. The well-being and future of Minnesota's children depended on the choices made in these very halls, by teachers, by parents, and by leaders whose decisions would echo for generations to come. The press wasted no time. "Governor, have you made a decision about 2026? For weeks, Walz had deflected, focusing on his current work, but this time his tone shifted. He acknowledged the speculation, framing his thought process as one of responsibility, not ambition. Walz spoke of unfinished work, economic development, infrastructure, education, implying the job wasn't done. "This is one of those things I don't think you switch horses midstream," he said, signaling his intent. The message was clear. Changing leadership now would disrupt progress. He was no longer just hinting. He was making a public case for continuity. His words moved the conversation from speculation to near certainty. Reporters had their headline. Walz was preparing to run, framing it as a duty, not a quest for power. The campaign, though unofficial, had quietly begun in a school hallway. Walz didn't keep the press guessing for long. When pressed, he replied, "I think that's a safe assumption," electrifying the political landscape. The ambiguity was gone. His intent was clear. Supporters rallied, opponents took note. The 2026 race was on. Walz promised a formal announcement soon, controlling the narrative and keeping attention on his next move. His safe assumption comment was a masterstroke, confident, inevitable, but not arrogant. It suggested his third-term bid was a logical continuation of his commitment to Minnesota. In 3 words, he confirmed his intentions, energized his base, and framed his candidacy as service. The state's political focus shifted decisively to the coming campaign. Walz had set the stage for the next chapter in Minnesota politics. Beyond politics, Walz spoke with emotion about the privilege and responsibility of leading Minnesota. He described the governorship as a personal honor and a role of stewardship, not ownership. The job, he said, demands constant engagement and resilience, celebrating triumphs, standing with communities in tragedy. Walz's connection to Minnesota is deep, motivating his desire to continue serving. He sees himself as a caretaker of the state's values and future, not ready to step aside. The challenges of recent years have only strengthened his resolve. His pride in leading Minnesota is rooted in service, not prestige. This emotional core will be central to his campaign. For Walz, the work is unfinished, and his sense of duty is stronger than ever. His leadership is defined by empathy, resilience, and a commitment to the people he serves. Walz's decision was shaped by a summer of violence that shook Minnesota. The fatal shooting of Speaker Melissa Hortman and her husband, and the wounding of Senator Hoffman and his wife, marked a chilling escalation of political violence. For Walz, these attacks were assaults on democracy itself, underscoring the fragility of civil order. The state also faced a relentless spike in gun violence, leaving communities grieving and fearful. The governor was called to comfort families and promise action, bearing the weight of crisis. These tragedies made the idea of switching horses midstream more urgent. For Walz, stepping away now would feel like abandoning his responsibility. The challenges had become about public safety and social cohesion, not just policy. The summer's sorrow solidified his belief that steady leadership was needed more than ever. The mass shooting at Annunciation Church and School was the summer's most devastating event, sending shockwaves through the entire state. What began as an ordinary day ended in unimaginable tragedy, leaving families and neighbors reeling from the loss and horror. The pain was felt far beyond the school's walls, touching every corner of the community and sparking a wave of grief and outrage. On August 27, 2024, a gunman killed 2 students and wounded many others, shattering the community's sense of safety. The sound of sirens and the sight of emergency vehicles became etched in memory, as parents rushed to find their children and neighbors gathered in disbelief. The aftermath left a deep scar, with questions echoing about how such violence could happen here. For Governor Tim Walz, this tragedy became the driving force behind his decision to seek a 3rd term. He stood before the cameras, visibly shaken, vowing to do everything in his power to prevent another tragedy like this from ever happening again. The weight of responsibility pressed heavily on his shoulders. The horror of that day turned his mission into a personal crusade for safety. Meeting with grieving parents and attending vigils, Walz felt the urgency of their pain and the need for action. He listened to stories of loss and heartbreak, and those moments fueled his determination. The debate over gun violence was no longer theoretical, it was painfully real. Town halls overflowed with emotion and protest signs filled the streets. The community demanded answers, and the call for change grew louder with each passing day. Walz channeled grief into a call for legislative change, determined not to let the victims be forgotten. He met with lawmakers, urging them to act, and visited memorials to pay his respects. Each note and flower left behind was a reminder of the lives lost and the work still to be done. The safety of Minnesota's children became his administration's top priority. New security measures were discussed, and parents looked for reassurance as they sent their children back to school. The sense of vulnerability lingered, but so did a renewed commitment to protect the next generation. This tragedy clarified his purpose and deepened his resolve to lead. Walz spent long hours with his advisors, searching for solutions and reviewing policies, determined to turn heartbreak into meaningful action. The shooting was no longer just a factor. It was the reason for his renewed commitment. Every headline, every memorial, and every conversation reminded him of the stakes and the urgent need for change. Walz's path forward was now about honoring the fallen and fighting for a safer future. He promised to carry the memory of the victims with him, letting their stories guide his actions as he worked to build a Minnesota where every child could feel safe again. After the Annunciation shooting, Walz made sure the victims were remembered as individuals, not statistics. He spoke of Fletcher Merkel and 10-year-old Harper Moisky, personalizing the tragedy for lawmakers and the public. Harper's upcoming celebration of life became a symbol of the community's shared grief. Walz urged legislators to witness these stories before making decisions on gun reform. By centering Fletcher and Harper, he elevated the debate above politics, framing it as a moral imperative. He challenged lawmakers to act as Minnesotans and parents, not partisans. The memory of these children became his most powerful argument for change. Their stories transformed the push for reform into a solemn promise. Fueled by tragedy and public outcry, Walz is channeling his administration's energy into urgent gun reform. He insists that condolences are no longer enough. The time for action is now. His goal, a special legislative session focused solely on gun safety laws. Walz is blunt. The common denominator among school shootings is firearms. We are going to do something about that. He's demanding a legislative solution, not just a conversation. The special session is a tactic to force lawmakers to address the issue with urgency. Walz is leveraging public opinion and the stories of Fletcher and Harper to pressure legislators. This is the first major test of his renewed purpose and leadership. Whether he succeeds or not, the fight for gun reform is now the central battleground of his administration. As the school year begins under a cloud of sorrow, the weight of recent tragedy lingers in the air. The halls are quieter, the faces more somber, and the community is still searching for answers. The American flag at half-mast is a daily reminder of the lives lost and the pain that has touched every family, every classroom, and every heart in Minnesota. For Governor Tim Walz, the path ahead is now unmistakable. A third term is not just likely, but almost inevitable. The people look to him for leadership, stability, and hope in a time when those qualities are needed most. This decision isn't about political gain. It's forged in the aftermath of heartbreak, shaped by a renewed sense of responsibility to protect and serve. Walz's resolve is born from the grief of families and the unity of a community determined to heal. The challenges he faces, political violence, senseless shootings, and a community gripped by fear, have transformed his mission. What once was a campaign has become a crusade for safety and justice. The fight for a special session on gun reform will define the coming months. The debates will be heated, the opposition fierce, but the stakes have never been higher. Every decision made in the legislature now carries the weight of lives lost and futures at risk. Walz is more focused and determined than ever before. He keeps relentless pressure on lawmakers, refusing to let the urgency fade. He stands with victims' families, not just in words, but in action, honoring their pain with promises he intends to keep. The stories of Fletcher and Harper, and so many others, remain at the heart of his call to action. Their memories fuel his resolve, reminding everyone that behind every statistic is a family forever changed. This campaign is about more than politics. It's about honoring lost lives with real, lasting change. Walz seeks not just to win votes, but to restore faith in government, and to prove that leadership can be compassionate and courageous. Walz frames his third term as a necessity, a mission that remains unfinished. He knows the work ahead will be difficult, but he is undeterred, driven by a sense of purpose that goes beyond any election cycle. Guided by duty and the memory of a summer marked by sorrow, Tim Walz stands ready to continue the fight for Minnesota's future, determined to turn pain into progress and loss into lasting change.